Houston. Houston, we have a problem. DJ Apollo has landed. I repeat, DJ Apollo has landed at Hipmix 88.9 WEIU.
Welcome to the Tales of Music and Film podcast. My name is DJ Apollo, or aka Christian Taylor, and thank you for clicking on today's episode. Oh man, am I super excited. We have a good one today, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to mark episode number 59. I cannot believe it. We are less than one recording away from hitting the big 60. I cannot wait. I am super excited. And today we're talking about another favorite film that I absolutely love. I know I've said that many times. I'm sure you are wondering, DJ Apollo, your favorites list is like a scroll at this point. I'm like, yep, I know. I have a lot of favorite films. And this film, I was actually very late to the party on this one. I unfortunately did not grow up with this film, but nonetheless, this movie is one of the few films that I call a masterpiece. Today, we are talking about one of the biggest films ever made, Jaws. When a young woman is killed by a shark while skinny dipping near New England tourist town of Anime Island, Police Chief Martin Brody, played by Roy Scheider, wants to close the beaches, but Mayor Larry Vaughn, played by Murray Hamilton, overrules him, fearing that the loss of tourist revenue will cripple the town. Ethologist Matt Hooper, played by Richard Dreyfuss, and grizzled ship captain Quint, played by Robert Shaw, offer to help Brody capture the killer beast, and the trio engages in an epic battle of man versus nature. Now, if that's not an awesome description of a film, I don't know what is. This movie is it is as close to a masterpiece as you can get. There is not going to be that many flaws I'm going to talk about here today regarding this film. The movie was released on June 20th, 1975, and the director was none other than one of the biggest filmmakers of all time, the Steven Spielberg. And this was Steven Spielberg's first big movie. He was only 27 years old at the time that he made this. Cinematography was done by Bill Butler. The movie had a couple of Oscar nominations, including the Academy Award for Best Picture. It was distributed by Universal Pictures, adapted from the book of the same name. It was based off the famous novel written by Peter Bentley. The cast for this movie, we have Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, Robert Shaw, Lorraine Gary, Jay Mello, Murray Hamilton, and Chris Rebello. And another cool fact regarding this movie is that Jaws was the very first film to use the term BlockBuster. This movie was one of the very first times that lines would line up around many blocks, and the line would just go on probably for like a mile or something. Like these lines, the lengths these lines went was insane. Millions of people were dying to see this movie. And this movie ended up grossing $476.5 million. And this film, actually, for a couple of years, actually held the record for highest grossing film until Star Wars came out 2 years later, Star Wars New Hope, which was directed by Steven Spielberg's friend, George Lucas. And so the first talking point that I want to get into with this movie is that I was actually very late to the party on this. I actually didn't watch Jaws for the first time up until a couple of years ago. When I started college, when I was really starting to take, classes and everything regarding filmmaking and everything, I realized that there was a lot of big films out there that I had yet to see, and one of them being Jaws. I finally found it on DVD. I got it. It was gifted to me on Blu-ray as a gift for my parents, I believe. And I watched it for the very first time. Now, I will admit, I did go into this film with a lot of hype because, the Jaws, I already kind of knew the premise of the film because this movie is it had a major impact on pop culture. Even till this very day, everybody still talks about it. This film has a major influence. So, I'm really into pop culture. It's like it's impossible not to hear about this film. So I had the gist of the film going in, but due to the years of hype that I heard about this film, I went into it with a lot of hype, which is not a good thing. Like, you don't want to go into a film with way too high expectations. I feel like that's a problem that a lot of people have today, is that they set their expectation level too high. And there's a good chance that that will ruin the movie for you. And unfortunately, it didn't ruin the film for me, but it did take around 2 or 3 watches before I really started appreciating what it was. About the 3rd or 4th watch, I realized, holy cow, this movie is incredible. Like, I honestly, I tried to watch this looking for flaws. I could barely find any, to tell you the truth. And I don't have a whole lot of history with this film other than that. But I'll tell you, I'm saying this right now that I will continue to watch this film for the rest of my life. Like, this movie is so good. And the reason why I love it so much is just because I'm a big fan of adventure films. The feeling of adventure in this movie is off the charts. And just, you really understand the stakes. So the whole premise of the film is that there is this giant great white shark that's hunting down people who go out to swim in the ocean on Enemy Island. And it kills 2 people. And then our main character, Martin Brody, who is the police chief of the island, has to figure out a way to deal with this problem. And that's when he teams up with Robert Shaw's character, Quint. And about 30 minutes into the movie, we get introduced to Richard Dreyfuss's character, Matt Hooper. And Hooper is my favorite character in the entire film. He's an amazing character. And I thought Richard Dreyfuss, this is one of his best performances, I think, that he ever gave. He is nothing but energy in this film. And it's just watching the main trio work together to solve this problem as they go out on Quinn's boat out to sea to hunt down the shark. It's just like, even before that, the film does an amazing job of building it up, because the movie opens up with this girl who's at a party on the beach, runs out to go skinny dipping with this guy. He passes out on the beach because he's drunk, and she swims out all by herself, and that's when the shark gets her. That whole opening scene of her being dragged under is horrifying, just because of how real it was. And a cool little trivia for you regarding that scene. There were scuba divers underneath the water, and they had ropes tied to the actress's ankles, and they were yanking her around to make it look like the shark was attacking her. And for the final pull, when she's yanked under, Steven Spielberg was actually under the water. He was the one who did the final pull to yank her underwater because he wanted it done a certain way, so he went under and did it himself. I believe that's how it was. It was something like that. There is an amazing documentary. It's about an hour and 30 minutes long that you can find on YouTube that came out back in 2004, 2005, something like that, about the making of Jaws. It's like one of the most intriguing stories I've ever seen regarding filmmaking. The amount of work that went into making this film is uncanny. And going back to what I was saying, that opening scene, though, man, it does not get any more real than that. And then, like, in the next morning when she's reported missing, Brody and that guy she was out with, they're walking around the beach looking to see if they can find her, and they find her remains washed up on the beach. And it's like, we don't see it, but their reactions say it all. It's like show don't tell kind of thing. It's amazing. See, this film does an amazing job of really building out the shark threat. And what I like about this, we don't see the shark ever. We don't see the shark fully until like an hour into the movie. Like, this film's around like 2 hours. We don't see the shark for the, in person until like over halfway through. The shark was actually supposed to make appearances throughout the entire film, but during production, they built multiple live animatronic sharks. but they worked in pool water and studio backlots. But when they took it out to the actual filming location, you know, the water was salt water, and the salt water messed up, you know, every electronic, and they had technical difficulties throughout the entire shoot. It was a nightmare. So they had no choice but to cut back on shark scenes, and Spielberg had to come up with ways to imply that the shark was there. So what he did was he used this very cool state-of-the-art tech for the mid-70s. It was his camera that you could take underwater, and it would, you know, he would film long takes of the camera moving through the water as if we're looking through the eyes of the shark. Like we're seeing the shark's point of view. And this technique is done throughout the entire film, and it works beautifully, because one of the oldest tricks regarding a horror movie is that the less you see of the killer or monster, the more terrifying it is, because you don't know what it looks like. Another prime example is the first Alien film that came out in '79. The alien is barely seen until towards the end of the film. The movie does an amazing job of like making its presence just horrifying and just scary. And Jaws, that's one of the main reasons why it works so well. If it hadn't been for that shark, the shark malfunctioning, the movie would have turned out, you know, way different. And my favorite part regarding this film are the characters. The cast in this film, like, you want all these people to make it. Whenever one of them are killed, you're just like, no, like, you genuinely feel sad. Like, Spielberg did an amazing job of first introducing you to the characters for a good portion of the film on land, living their lives. You get an idea on who they are and what kind of person they are, and you get attached. Like, best example is Chief Brody's family. He has a wife and 2 sons. His sons look like they're around ages between 5 and 7. And like they're good, like they're a really good family. You know, like they love each other. And all the scenes with them really amps the stakes up when the shark attacks his kids later on in the film. And they live, don't worry. But, you know, you get the gist of how dangerous it is. Whenever the kids are in danger, you know, like, this film does not hold back in showing you, like, how dangerous the situation is. Like, heck, we see it, a kid gets eaten in this film about 30 minutes in, and, dude, that whole sequence, the actors who performed in that, and all the actors who were on the beach, many of them said it made them sick because of how real it was, you know? I could continue talking about the realism for like another hour, but to continue, another reason why I like this film so much is because this is another rare example. So this movie is way better than the book, and you don't hear that very often. You know how in most cases, like I'm sure most people can agree with this statement, most times when a movie is based off a famous book, usually the film doesn't get anywhere near close to what the book covered. Because unfortunately, when you adapt a book, you can't cover the whole thing. There's going to be a lot of instances where you're either going to have to cut stuff or make it more dramatic. Because, you know, there's a big difference between reading and watching. Like the Harry Potter films, for example, like they got a lot of controversy, I think, over the years. Because I think a lot of fans were mad due to how a lot of the films had to cut out a lot of key information to keep the movies around, you know, 2 hours. And if those films had been allowed to cover everything, I think each Harry Potter film would have been like 4 hours. Like Lord of the Rings extended cuts length, those would have been. And I don't think anybody would want to sit in the theater for that long a time. But I mean, I would. Longer films don't bother me now. I mean, heck, I watched Dune Part 1, and that film was like 3 hours. So, but so one of the main reasons why the film is so much better than the book is because, like, apparently, now I have not read the book personally, but I heard that the characters were not written very well. Spielberg himself even said that the characters, none of them are likable in the book version. Like, Spielberg even said that he wanted the shark to win at the end. So I think that's like one of the first things he did when making the film was, you know, change it up and actually get these people personalities and character and make them all likable. That was the first thing he did. Another thing that he did, he actually changed out the story a little bit. So, spoiler warning, Hooper dies in the book. But in the film, so here's a little more trivia for you. So they fully intended to kill off Hooper, just like in the book. But Spielberg hired these two people who study sea life to get footage of a real life shark attacking a cage, because near the end of the film, Hooper comes up with this idea of gearing up in a scuba dive suit, and he gets inside a cage, and Quentin and Brody send him underwater inside of the cage with this pole with a needle attached to it, because he's gonna try to inject the shark with poison to kill it. And this plan goes south really fast. The shark bumps the cage, and Hooper drops the pole, and it goes down into the sea below. And now and now he's trapped inside the cage, and the shark is bashing the cage, trying to rip it open. And in the book, Hooper gets eaten. But what happened was, when they were filming the scene of the shark tearing the cage up, apparently they were supposed to film scenes with a stunt double inside the cage, but they forgot to put a stunt double in the cage. So the footage they got of the real shark attacking the cage, it was empty. So they had to, so in order to use that footage, because this was groundbreaking footage of what they captured, the shark ripping the cage up. It was way better than they were planning. So they had to make that footage work. So in the film, what they did was they filmed a scene of Hooper. What he does, he pulls a knife out, stabs the shark a few times. It swims away for a moment. He's able to crawl out of the cage and swim to safety. Then the shark comes back and rips the cage up. So in the movie version, Hooper lives. And to tell you the truth, I'm happy that change happened, because if the movie just ended with Brody being the sole survivor, that would have been a little depressing, because, spoiler warning, Quentin gets eaten near the end of the film. So I'm glad that Hooper made it, because when Brody and him are swimming back to land on a piece of debris talking to each other, it was a nice little hopeful moment that the ending would not have been the same if Hooper had been killed. So I'm happy that through circumstances that they are able to change that and let Hooper live. But that's just another piece of movie trivia for you. And to go into more history with this movie, I want to get back into the filmmaking for a minute. So another fun little fact, this is one of my favorite facts about the filmmaking of the film. We all know the famous quote that Roy Scheider says, "We're gonna need a bigger boat." Even people who haven't seen Jaws will know about that quote. It's like one of the most famous quotes of all time. I even saw somewhere that this quote is like in the top 10 most famous quotes ever said in film history. And what's funny is that quote was not in the script at all. When Roy Scheider was in the studio doing the ADR for the film, he ad-libbed that quote into the film. And I just think it's so cool how, through creative liberties, he came out with that quote and said that, and it's become so iconic. And I know I kind of went into this earlier, but I'm saying this right now. They had 3 different shark animatronics. They had one to move right, another one for left, and then another one to look straight ahead and stuff like that. And they literally had a barge, right? With the mechanical switches and everything. It was called the USS Garage Sale because of all the junk they had on there. And remotely controlling this shark was a living nightmare. There's actually a funny story where Steven Spielberg actually brought George Lucas on set, and George climbed inside the shark and he broke it, and the crew had to fix it. I can't imagine how mad they must have been. It's just like, I'm not kidding when I say the animatronic shark changed the film by a lot, but I think it was a good thing, like I said earlier. But I'm just trying to say, like, if you watch a documentary, man, trying to operate the shark was hell on earth for those crew members. It was not fun at all. Now here we're gonna get into possibly my favorite scene in the entire film. So around over halfway through the movie, where when Brody, Hooper, and Quint make first contact with the shark, they manage to strap a barrel to it, and Hooper tied a tracker to the barrel. So now they know where the shark is, and they're waiting for it to come back up again. So they're all inside the boat eating dinner inside the cabin. And Hooper and Quint start comparing scars they've gathered over the years from their careers that they do. Because Quint is a fish hunter. He has a lot of scars from, fish and other sea life that cut him, and Hooper, same thing. He's got scars on his arm, his chest, and after they compare scars for a little bit, Hooper notices what he believes to be a scar on Quint's arm, and then Quint's like, "Oh no, that's not a scar, it's a tattoo. I had it removed." And that's when he reveals to Hooper and Brody that the tattoo was the USS Indianapolis. The USS Indianapolis was a battleship that was sank by a German submarine during World War II. And the ship sank in 12 minutes, and no distress signal was able to be sent in time due to how fast the ship sank. What's famous about the ship is that it delivered one of the atomic bombs that was used on Hiroshima in April of '45. And they delivered the bomb, and on their way back, they were torpedoed twice, and the ship sank, and all the crew had to jump out at sea, and they floated out there for over a week. And 1,100 men went into the water, and only less than 300 men survived because sharks ate most of the survivors in the water. During the week they were floating around in the water, sharks attacked them, and most of the crew were killed by shark attacks. Only 300 of them made it. And Spielberg wanted Quint to have a real tragic connection because he wanted to give the audience a reason for why Quint hates sharks so much. And what's the reason? Why is he hunting why is he hunting sharks? Why does he hate them so much? So he came up with this him and some of the other writers came up with the idea of having Quint be one of the survivors of the Indianapolis. And he recalls his story. Now, I'm saying this right now. This is actually Steven Spielberg's favorite scene of the movie as well. Sit there and listen to Robert Shaw give this monologue. It is Academy Award worthy. This scene alone should have gotten him an Oscar nomination. He was phenomenal in this scene. You have John Williams' scary score slightly playing in the background as he goes into more detail how, you hear the men screaming as they're torn apart, and he tries to wake a friend up who's floating next to him, not knowing that his friend was bitten in half below the waist. Just like, dude, it's terrifying. I can guarantee you if this was, I can just imagine this being played in a theater back in the day. I guarantee you the whole theater was silent, that whole 3-minute scene. It's 3 minutes, but it's like you don't see anything. You just see Quint sitting there just retelling this story as the camera slowly zooms in on him, and it is terrifying. It goes back to, all we have are his facial expressions and him and the words that he uses to describe the situation, and I get chills every single time I see this scene. It is terrifying. And the credit for this scene goes to Robert Shaw. And what's funny is he actually did this scene 2 times. The first time he did it, he was flat out drunk. So Shaw was actually very notorious for drinking. He drank all the time. And he did the first take completely drunk out of his mind. And the second take he did cold sober. So what they did was they actually mixed the scenes up. Some are him sober, and some of the takes are him drunk. You can't tell the difference, but the way they edited it together, it fits perfectly. And I think that is the most human scene throughout the entire film. Getting to learn Quinn's backstory to why he does this, it's amazing. I'm so happy that they wrote that scene in. And Spielberg said the minute they filmed that scene, that's when they knew they had something good here. And the next thing I wanted to get into, I mentioned this, is John Williams' score for this movie. Now, what else can you say about John Williams' music at this point that hasn't already been said? John Williams is going to go down as one of the most legendary film composers of all time. There is no doubt about it. Like, this guy has done so many soundtracks for film, and he's 90 years old and he's still doing it. He's composing the music right now for Indiana Jones 5. 90 years old, still doing what he loves. The guy has not lost a beat. He is so amazing with the music that he makes, and he deserves all the credit. My gosh, how many Oscars for Best Music has this man won? He's won tons. And he's set the bar high on what a composer can do. And I think one of his most famous pieces he ever made was the Jaws theme. You know, the dun-da, 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 dun-da. You know, it's terrifying. And the movie would not be what it is without the soundtrack. I was watching a YouTuber. His name is Chris Stuckman. I used to watch him for a while in high school. He does film reviews. He said he actually watched the movie once, and he turned off the music. And he said it was a completely different film. That music is one of the key elements to why the film works so well. That music plays whenever the shark shows up, and that music just further enhances the dangers that our main characters are in, and that the threat is lurking right below them. You know, it's scary. After this film came out, if you played this music anywhere, people would be terrified. It was like the Halloween theme for the original Halloween. It's scary. And now it's like one of the most famous pop culture music tracks of all time. So yeah, John Williams' score is incredible, and there's nothing else I can really say, but it's just masterpiece. And unfortunately, Jaws got 3 sequels, Jaws 2, 3, and 4, and I cannot express to you how awful those films are. I heard Jaws 2 was decent because they brought back all the original characters and actors from the first movie, except for Richard Dreyfuss. He said no, but everybody else came back. It looks okay, but the sequel makes absolutely no sense. So literally, okay, I'm gonna explain something. So literally, Jaws, the ending of this film is that Quentin gets eaten while the ship is sinking due to all the damage the shark did to it. Hooper is underwater still in his scuba diver suit, hiding behind a rock. So Brody's the last one standing for a moment. He climbs up to the outlook deck on the ship, which is called the Orca, by the way, and he has Quint's M1 Grand Rifle. It carries 8 rounds, and when he was inside the ship, he managed to throw a scuba diver oxygen tank inside the shark's mouth, and it's stuck in his mouth. So the shark's swimming around with the propane tank in his mouth. So Scheider is trying to shoot the tank with the rifle. He gets down to the last shot. Then he's like, "Small, you son of a bitch." And he pulls the trigger, hits the tank. The whole shark explodes. It rains blood. And we watch the corpse float down into the water, and then that's when Hooper swims back up. Then Hooper and Brody find a piece of debris and they swim back to land, and that's the end of the film. And it's amazing when Brody gives that giant cheer at the end of it. It's just like everybody. I can just imagine the whole theater crowd just standing up and start cheering. It feels like a real, true victory. And you would think the story would end there, right? There's nothing else to tell. But of course, the film made millions of dollars, so of course, sequel comes out 3 years later in 1978. And I heard it was pretty decent, but it was just as difficult to film as the last one. Spielberg did not direct it. I don't think he had any involvement in it whatsoever. Well, good thing for him, because it didn't need to exist. And then Jaws 3 came out, Jaws 3D, in 1983. And I heard that one was an absolute train wreck. The effects are horrible. Like, literally, the main characters in that one are his sons grown up in, like, in their early 20s. The sons that had, like, 5 minutes of screen time, and 1 and 2 is just like, what? And then Jaws 4 is said to be one of the worst films / sequels ever made. I've watched scenes from it. It is atrocious, man. It's awful. It's the Alien 3 of the Jaws films. It's so terrible. It's awful. And it's just like going back to Jaws 2 for a minute. So you find out it's the same shark from the first movie that's come back and it's attacking the town again. And it's just like, how does that make any sense? We saw this shark in the last movie get blown to pieces. And it comes back, it has a giant scar on its mouth. I'm like, no. Like, no. That makes no sense whatsoever. It's just like, why? I'm just like, dude, the lengths they went to bring the shark back. I'm just like, are you kidding me? You're just gonna undo the amazing ending of the original. It's just like, not Hollywood. Not everything needs a sequel, okay? You can do one film and call it done. Not everything needs sequels, okay? So Jaws is a one-time thing. Nothing else happened after it as far as I'm concerned. But you're not missing anything with those sequels, I can assure you. But to go back to our talking point here, this film, this movie is almost 50 years old. 2 years from now, this movie is going to be hitting 50, and I can't believe it. And 48 years later, this movie holds up amazingly. I need to rewatch it again. It's been a while since I've watched it last. And what's cool is, I know I've mentioned this many times, but there's these reaction YouTube channels I watch of all these people who react to movies for the first time. And Jaws is a fave film that they react to for the first time. Watching all these people react to the film for the first time is so awesome, because it's like they show the same emotions that I had when I watched it for the first time, And every single one of them, when their credits are rolling, they're all just like, this movie is incredible. So it's just like 48 years later, and this movie is still touching audiences. I think Spielberg and everybody involved should feel happy. Like, you guys created one of the biggest films ever made, and it's still being talked about 5 decades later. And it holds up well. I mean, there's no negatives that I can say about this. Like, Jaws is one of those rare occasions where it's like, it is as close to a perfect film as you can get. There's really no flaws in this that I can't see. But overall, Jaws is going to be one of my favorite films ever. If I ever do a top 15 films of all time that I would watch on a loop, Jaws would be on there for sure. And after this movie, if it weren't for Jaws, Spielberg would not have had the career that he had. Everybody thought that this film was going to bomb. Like, Richard Dreyfuss himself even went on television and said that he thought it was going to flop. Like, everybody thought this film was going to be a complete disaster. And it ended up grossing millions of dollars. And I think it launched everybody's career. I think everybody involved in this went to the, like, were they went to big things. Everybody involved in this did big things with their careers, to say the least. And I just can't imagine, like, can you imagine having this film on your resume? Like that, I feel like any filmmaker would hire you instantly. Oh, you worked on Jaws? You're on the crew. I feel like they wouldn't even have to think twice about it. But my gosh, man, I just think it's. You ever notice that? I kind of noticed, like, if you go back through history, all the biggest films that ever been made were everybody thought at the time when they were being made they were going to bomb. Like, another prime example is that George Lucas thought that Star Wars New Hope was going to bomb, so he didn't go to the premiere. He went on vacation with Steven Spielberg in the late 70s, and that's when George Lucas showed his idea for Indiana Jones to Steven Spielberg. Because around when the late 70s rolled around, Spielberg was wanting to do a James Bond-ish type movie. And that was when George Lucas showed him his idea for Indiana Jones, and then Spielberg said yes to make the film, and the rest is history. And then, Star Wars would go on to beat Jaws at the box office. So it feels like all throughout history, all these big films that were made were said to bomb, and they ended up grossing millions of dollars and becoming some of the biggest films ever made. And Jaws' impact on pop culture is huge. Anywhere you go, man, like, stores still have Jaws t-shirts. Like the famous poster of the shark coming up with the lady swimming in the water, and you have the Jaws logo in dark red and big font. It's one of the most iconic film covers of all time. It just shows you right away, like, the experience that you're in for. Now, to say what genre this film is, I mean, I don't know. This movie is a mix of a lot of things. Like, it's adventure, horror, suspense, action. I feel like it has all those components. Like, I wouldn't say it's just a straight up horror movie. It's got a mix of elements, which is a good thing. I don't think this movie would have worked as well if the whole thing was just a straight up horror movie. But the fact, it's like we get breaks, it's like, hey, we got some horror, okay, we got some family fun, okay, we got some action, some suspense. Now we're back to horror again. It kind of like jumps around with all of them, but it does a good job of blending all of them together. And overall, I think Jaws is a masterpiece. I'm saying this right now. If you have not seen this movie yet, I highly, highly recommend it. And I think it's a really good summertime film, too. And I think it's so funny that Richard Dreyfuss, in the documentary that I mentioned earlier, he talks about how, like, him and Spielberg went on vacation once in the early 2000s, and they both said after the making of Jaws, they're both afraid to go out in the deep areas of water. They said they'll walk out like halfway to where, like, their chests are cut. Like, they go like halfway, and then they like stop right there because they're like, I don't know. It's just like, I don't know if it's like a fear or something. It's like ever since they filmed Jaws, they're like scared to death to go out in deep areas of water. I just kind of think it's funny, almost 5 decades later, But all the actors and all the filmmakers all went on to big things. Like Roy Scheider went on to go in other films, and he actually got a couple of Oscar nominations. Unfortunately, Robert Shaw passed away in 1978, and Richard Dreyfuss would go on to win an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for The Goodbye Girl, which came out in 1977. And he would go on to be in other films like Stand By Me and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He had a very successful film career. He retired around like 2011, I think it was. He doesn't really act and stuff anymore, but he does do conventions still. I actually looked up a convention in Chicago from like a couple of years ago. He was there signing stuff. So he still does, like conventions and stuff. And Roy Scheider passed away in 2006. So Richard Dreyfuss is like one of the last like main characters who are still alive. He's around 75 years old right now. He was 27 when they filmed Jaws, but the movie is phenomenal. And I just want to say thank you for listening to this recording. And it was an absolute honor getting to cover Jaws. I love this film, and I will continue to watch it for the rest of my life. So I just want to say thank you for listening to this recording. And I just want to say personally thank you for all the amazing support that you have given me for the last year. We are slowly nearing the end of the podcast for now, but I will find ways to keep it going. And we're now one episode away from hitting 60. I'm super excited about it. I'm not going to reveal what my 60th episode topic will be, but it's going to be a good one. That I can promise you. So, until next time, my name is DJ Apollo, and you are listening to the Tales of Music and Film.